Hi, welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. On this video, we're going to look at monopolies in the short run. Monopolies in the short run, and things get a little more complicated in the short run because a firm faces fixed costs, and that's going to make it a little more complicated to answer our three questions for the firm. The three questions that the firm is trying to answer are: one, how much to produce, how much of the good, whatever it is they're producing, how many should they make? Number two, are they operating at a profit or a loss? And number three, in the short run, should they stay open or shut down? Should they stay open or shut down? And just understand that the concept of shutdown is a short run concept. It means that a firm is temporarily going to stop producing the good, but they will produce more again in the future. So that's the shutdown. We'll talk about that as we go throughout this video. So let's get right into the graph. The first possible thing that could happen is this. Let's draw a graph for a monopoly. We got quantity on the horizontal. It could be a capital Q or lowercase q because the monopolist is the individual firm and the monopolist is the market. And on the vertical axis, we are just measuring in dollars. So for a typical monopolist, you're going to have a marginal cost curve that is downward sloping and then rises. That's going to be marginal cost. And then you're going to have an average total cost curve, and the average total cost curve is going to be downward sloping, hits a minimum and rises. That's going to be your average total cost. And then separate from that, you're going to have an average variable cost curve. And the average variable cost curve is going to be downward sloping, hits a minimum, and then begins to rise, getting closer and closer to the average total cost curve. That's the average variable cost curve. So the average variable and the average total are going to get closer and closer to each other as production rises. And then we're going to have the monopolist is going to face a demand curve. So there's going to be a downward sloping demand curve and a marginal revenue curve. They're going to face a marginal revenue curve below the demand curve. So here's what things look like for the monopolist in the short run. So the first question is how much to produce. So the answer to that is always the same. The firm's going to produce where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. Now, this gets complicated. We have a marginal revenue curve right here, downward sloping, and we got the marginal cost curve is right here. So yes, marginal revenue equals marginal cost right there. And then we want to get tunnel vision. So that's where we're going to produce. So we're going to come down here and mark production at Q1. And that's my answer to question number one. Firm's going to produce Q1 units where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. That's the answer to question number one. Okay. Question number two, is the firm operating at an economic profit or an economic loss? So we're going to get tunnel vision here at Q1. That's going to be our level of production. So we're going to take that all the way up to the demand curve. And the firm is going to set their price off the demand curve, and that price that they set is going to be their average revenue. So we come across here and we mark the average revenue. That's the average revenue if they produce a Q1. If they produce a Q1, then the average total cost will be right here where we intersect the average total cost curve. So that's going to be the average total cost for the monopolist. And then come up to where you hit the average variable cost, and that's going to be the average variable cost for the monopolist when they produce at Q1. So that's going to be the average variable cost. Sorry, that's a little tight right there. That's AVC, average variable cost. So question number two, is the firm operating at a profit or a loss? The answer to that is that this firm is operating at an economic profit. How do I know it's an economic profit? I know it's an economic profit because the average revenue is greater than the average total cost. The average revenue is greater than the average total cost. So the firm is operating in an economic profit, and that economic profit is right here between average revenue and average total cost. Question number three, should the firm stay open or shut down? Well, of course they should stay open. They have an economic profit. That means they're beating their next best opportunity. But let's just write down formally the way we say this is that the firm will stay open because the average revenue is greater than the average variable cost. The average revenue is greater than the average variable cost. Okay, so that's a little easier, the situation where they have an economic profit. Let's go to the second possible situation, and this is where it will get more complex. So let's go ahead and draw it. We're going to have a marginal cost curve, slopes down and then rises. We're going to have average total cost curve, slope down, hit a minimum and rises. Average variable cost curve slopes down, hits a minimum, rises, getting closer and closer and closer to the average total. That's your average variable cost. And this time I'm going to draw the demand curve below the average total and the average variable. Okay, here the demand curve was above average total and average variable. Here the demand curve is going to be below average total and average variable. And then we have a marginal revenue curve coming off of that. Okay, let's answer our 3 questions. Answer to question number 1. Where do we produce? Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this gets complicated again. Let's find it. Here's the marginal revenue curve. Here's the marginal cost curve. So we're going to produce right here where the marginal revenue, we're going to produce a Q1 where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. And let's get that tunnel vision. So if we produce where the marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that's going to be producing at Q1. We're going to extend that all the way up. And now we need to label everything. So we need to come up to the demand curve and label it, because that's going to be where the firm sets its price. So that's going to be the average revenue for the firm. And then we come up to the average variable cost curve, come over. That's going to be the average variable cost. Sorry, this is a little tight. And then come up to the average total cost curve. And that's going to be the average total cost. Again, sorry, it's a little tight in there. So, is this firm operating at a profit or a loss? The answer is that they are producing at an economic loss. That means they are not beating their next best opportunity. They're producing an economic loss. Where is that economic loss? So this gets a little bit complicated. The economic loss is going to be, well, they're producing an economic loss. First, let's write down why. Because the average revenue is less than the average total cost. That's how we know they're producing an economic loss. The average revenue is below the average total cost. So this box right here, sorry, let me switch my color. This box right here, from the average total cost down to the average revenue, that is the loss that the firm is suffering. Now, it's important to say that is their loss if they keep producing. That's their loss if they stay open. That is their loss if they stay open. Okay, so if they stay open, the average revenue will be less than the average total cost, and they will be producing at a loss. What if the firm decides to shut down? Because if they shut down, if the firm decides to shut down, then that means that they will still have to pay their fixed costs. They will have no revenue, but they'll have to pay their fixed costs. And the fixed costs are in between the average total and the average variable. So if the firm shuts down, and that means they won't have any revenue because they won't be producing the good, but they're still going to have to pay their fixed costs. So their loss, if they shut down, will be equal to their fixed costs, which will be from average total to average variable. This will be their loss. Okay, that will be their loss if they shut down. That will be the loss if they shut down, because they will have to keep paying their fixed costs. Okay, their fixed costs will be the loss if they shut down. They'll have to keep paying those fixed costs. So what can we say? What's the answer to question number 3 down here? Will the firm stay open or will the firm shut down? So the firm will, let's see, they're going to shut down, because if they shut down, watch what happens. If they shut down, their losses will be smaller. They'll only have to pay the fixed cost losses instead of paying the losses if they keep producing. So the losses will be smaller. The technical way to say this is they will shut down because the average revenue is less than the average variable cost. Okay? So that gets a little complicated, but they will shut down because the average revenue, or sorry, because their economic loss, if they stay open, is a bigger area than their economic loss if they shut down. Because if they shut down, then they just got to pay their fixed costs. If they shut down, they just have to pay their fixed costs. Okay? So A lot to think about there. I'm gonna stop here, and I'm gonna come back on another video, and we'll talk about the third thing that can happen. The third thing that can happen over here. But I'm going to let that to another video because, again, it gets kind of complicated. So in another video, I'll come back. I'll finish this last graph, and then I'll talk about our general rules. But let's just talk about this one more time. When that demand curve is below average total and average variable, when that's the case, you can see that if they stay open, their loss, this blue area, will be larger than their loss if they shut down and just pay their fixed costs. Okay, if they shut down and just pay their fixed costs, those losses will be smaller. And after all, if you're going to lose money, you would like to lose as little as possible. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'll talk more about all of this. I'll finish up this graph, finish up these three general conclusions on an upcoming video. All right, so this has been another Econ video with Mr. Hagan. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next Econ podcast.